All right. So until we figure that out, Spek is the founder of and the president of PopArabia. PopArabia is the leading publishing company in the Mena region, and now they are started to go into signing artists from the Mena. And Spek will probably talk more about that and about their Palestinian artist that they signed. I don't know if they can talk about it, but we'll see. He's also the executive vice president international and international emerging markets at Reservoir. It's like a huge publishing company. Spek's work focus more on the MENA region, and the things that we're going to be discussing is where is this going in terms of in the music industry, and how is it like developing in the MENA region? MENA region, by that like we mean Middle East, North Africa, and how would that affect artists in Palestine and in the region? So thank you all. Let's see. I think I saw I see like your login now. Did you send? No, it's okay. 1 second, guys. I think we figured it out. Go. Okay, so this is Spek. This is not Nina Zidani. Well, just before we start, does it say Nina Zidani under your name?
It does. I don't know what that's about.
So weird. So weird.
I definitely didn't log in as Nina.
Yeah. And before that, it was Celia. That's why we couldn't find you.
Yeah. No, that's all good. That's all good.
Okay, finally.
How you guys doing?
Great. So thank you so much. I know like you're super busy, and really thank you for doing that. We really appreciate it.
All good. All good. PMX is like family, so it's all good.
Thanks, man. What's the time over there? You're in Dubai right now, right?
Yeah, it's about 6 o'clock. It's about 6 o'clock.
Cool. So you're in Dubai, right?
Yep.
Okay. You just moved there from New York?
Yeah, a few months ago. Actually, it's nearing on a year now. But it's been a weird year, so it's quick.
Cool. We're gonna talk about that. I did like a very brief introduction about yourself when we were trying to figure out that. I hope I didn't mess anything up. Anything that you want to add, like about what's like what you're doing right now in terms of PopArabia?
Yeah, I mean, I thought what I could do is I could sort of give a bit of a background of myself, my journey into PopArabia, and then maybe that could sort of segue nicely into how that sort of fits in with my view of where the future of the MENA music industry is going, because I obviously moved back because I feel that there's a tremendous opportunity for artists and executives in MENA in the medium to long term. And so yeah, I could so it's funny because a lot of people sort of, when I left Dubai and moved to New York 5 years ago, a lot of people in the Middle East sort of think of me as like some sort of lawyer or something. They think that I'm like this copyright guy, and I am, but I mean, I'm not a lawyer. But in Canada and the States, And a lot of people in the UK sort of know me really as an artist, you know? So the job at Reservoir, when I started at Reservoir 5 years ago, was really the first job where I combined these two sort of identities that I had, you know? But, you know, I'm a musician and an artist really through and through, you know, that's really, you know, when I was 14, I grew up in Montreal. And so when I was 14, I started in a rap group with a bunch of kids in high school at that time in Canada in the early 90s and the late 80s. It was completely weird to be a brown kid into hip hop. And I was literally the only kid who wasn't black, you know, at all the hip hop shows and the talent contests and all of that. And so my parents didn't know what to do with me, and you know, we hung out at lots of very dodgy places, you know, from all my teenage years. And when I was 14, the only hip hop group that was sort of really popular at the time in Canada, the first really hip hop group out of Canada that started doing well outside of Canada was a group called the Dream Warriors. And so we skipped school and we went out to see them at this autograph session. And, you know, the autograph session was packed. There was like over 1,000 kids there. And, you know, I got to the front to get my autograph, but of course everybody had sort of bought a CD in the record store. And I was the only one that had this magazine from when they were like super underground before anybody knew who they were. And so when I gave them the magazine, they looked at me like, oh, this guy's like a diehard fan, you know? So we started a conversation, and, you know, it got very quickly to this thing where they were like, well, you know, well, what do you know, are you coming to the show tonight? And I was like, oh, we wanted to come. We wanted to open up for you guys, but, you know, it's 18 and over because it's being done at a club and alcohol is being served there. But, you know, we're only 14, so we can't get in, you know? So they said to me and to my little crew, you know, if you guys show up at sound check, we'll sneak you into the gig, you know? So that's exactly what we did. We showed up to sound check, you know, we hung out with them, we started freestyling for them, started talking about the Canadian hip hop scene and all of that. And that sort of very quickly led to them just giving us their phone numbers and said, hey, you know, if you ever come down to Toronto, you know, let us know, you know, we're into producing demos for new artists. And so if you ever make it out there, you know, let us know. So, you know, you show up to school the next day and you're like, man, you know, like, not only did I meet these guys who I listened to, but I got their phone numbers, and now, you know, they're going to be producing my demos. And so we thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And really from the age of 14 to 17, that's all we did. Every opportunity we had, we would just jump on a bus that would take us to Toronto for $75. And then we'd stay in a rat hole motel and, you know, just ended up learning how to record in a studio, which is a completely different skill set than performing, you know, which is what we had really started, you know, as performers, really, at school talent contests and that sort of thing. And so that was sort of the first sort of evolution, you know, sort of learning how to become a recording artist, not just a performer, you know, and then developing as a writer and learning how to use your voice behind a controlled setting like a recording studio, which is again a completely different skill set and something that you learn and you have to get better at over years, you know. And when the band broke up, just as I sort of graduated from high school, the band in high school that I was in sort of split up, and the guys in the Dream Warriors were recording their second album. And so they asked me if I would record a few songs with them, and one song became 3, became 4. And then they said, do you want to join the group? You know? And so I ended up joining the first group I'd ever seen live, you know? And it was like super surreal, you know, I was straight out of high school, and, you know, and then they immediately, you know, by then they had already established themselves, had top 10s in the UK and across Europe, and gold and, you know, gold and platinum records and the rest of it. And so, so I started touring around the world with them, you know, and ended up meeting and working with a lot of my musical heroes. DJ Premier had produced some stuff on the album, and Gangstar, and Butterfly from Diggable Planets, and, you know, we ended up recording with Beanie Man and General Degree, and we did the second album I did with them, we recorded in Jamaica, and so we spent you know,
Amazing.
6 weeks in Jamaica with, you know, everybody in the scene out there. And
Wow.
so it was an amazing experience, learning experience. I was very fortunate. You know, I think I was kind of dope too, but you know, but there's a lot of luck that comes involved in timing and making the right decisions. And when the band, at some point I wanted to sort of break out and do my own solo stuff. And actually at the time I was really into the idea of mixing classical Indian music samples with hip hop. And that was sort of before that became a thing with Timbaland and Missy. So before Get Your Freak On, I was sort of doing that. And when I was doing it at the time and playing it to labels and stuff, everybody thought I was kind of weird, you know. They were like, is this world music? Like, what are you doing? You know,
Yeah.
and hip hop at that time was really, it was the era of Puff Daddy. So it was like 70s disco samples and that sort of thing, you know. So the idea of sampling tablas and stuff like that was sort of weird. And, you know, I had become, I sort of convinced myself that I wanted to move to the UK because that's where we had our biggest following. Was that even though we were a Canadian band, we were bigger in the UK than we were back home. And so, so I sort of convinced myself I needed to get out there, but I didn't know how to get out there. And so I asked a promoter who was a friend who promoted concerts on the ground. And I said, you know, do you have any suggestions on people I could speak to in the UK? And he was like, I got 2 phone numbers. He's like, I got one, which is Daddy G from Massive Attack. And I've got another one, which is Jeff Wilkinson from Us 3. And so he gave me both numbers. So I called both of them, right? And I ended up developing a sort of relationship where I would call them and I would play them demos over the phone and the rest of it. And so Grant from Massive sort of said to me, like, man, you know, there's a whole scene of kids, you know, there's this whole, what we're calling the Asian underground scene that's starting to happen in the UK. And that was 97. And so it was sort of like, you know, you need to be out here. You're not alone. You know, you might feel like you're the only one in Canada doing this, but over here, there's a whole scene of second generation immigrant kids who are using their cultural identity and then mixing it with drum and bass and hip hop and R&B and soul and the rest of it. And so at some point, Us 3 had recorded their album, and then they had a falling out with one of the rappers in the group, and they had this big tour planned, and they were fans of Dream Warriors. And so I just came home one day, back in the days when you had fax machines, and there was a fax, and it was an offer to tour across Europe for 6 months with Us 3, you know. And in the off time, I'd be based in London, you know. And so you know, we negotiated a little bit on the terms, but a couple weeks later, I was in London, and you know, I sort of, you know, I managed my way to get out there, you know. And so then during that period, in between touring, I would spend time trying to record demos. And of course, whenever I'd go on tour, we toured with Jamiroquai, we toured with a lot of these bands in the late 90s that I was like big fans of, you know. But then of course you end up playing with them, you end up becoming friends with the musicians. And so when you're both back in London, we would end up in somebody's home studio and recording demos together. And then I used those demos to start shopping for a publishing deal. And I ended up getting it to Annette Barrett at Warner Chappell, who at the time was the head of international at Warner Chappell. And she ended up signing me. Now, flash forward years later, Annette Barrett is now the head of Reservoir's UK office. And so now we work together again, except in this capacity now we're colleagues, you know?
Yeah.
But she really picked me out of, you know, the dirt when I was, you know, struggling in London, trying to sort of reignite my songwriting, my artist career. And so then that's really what I did. So then I ended up recording with Nitin Sawhney, who at the time had, he had released independent music, but he wasn't, you know, the Nitin Sawhney yet at that time in his career. And he was recording Beyond Skin, which ended up becoming his breakthrough album. And he asked me to work with him on that. And then I had a terrible breakup with a girlfriend, and I had no place to live, and so I ended up moving in with him, and then we ended up, making Beyond Skin, and I mean,
Yeah.
he made Beyond Skin. I was a part of the Pilgrim, which ended up being on the album, but then of course that ended up being nominated for the Mercury Prize, and sort of has gone on to really become his signature sort of album, I would say.
Yeah.
But that was, again, that was something that we did that at the time we thought it was special, but we didn't know it would become this culturally significant record. But that whole scene really, became an important piece of that era and that sort of history. I ended up doing solo records. I ended up putting my album out the week of September 11th, 2001, my solo record, which is a terrible time for a young Muslim kid to be putting out an album, but I went through the experiences of being an artist out in the UK, and actually I ended up being managed by a company called Big Life Management, which was headed by Jazz Summers and Tim Perry. And Big Life were, at the time, they were managing The Verve and Badly Drawn
Yeah.
Boy, a bunch of really cool stuff. And I mention it because now, years later, in my Reservoir capacity, we work together again, where Reservoir is partnered with Big Life.
Amazing.
Annette is the head of our UK office. Scott Cresto, who used to be our head of sync at Chrysalis, is now the head of sync at Reservoir. And so, like, everybody I worked with as an artist, I'm now working with as an executive. It's almost like, even Jeremy Lascelles, who's the CEO of Chrysalis, he was the one that signed me to my record label, the Echo label, as a solo artist. And so now with Reservoir, sort of getting involved with Chrysalis Music, which was announced about 6 months ago, I feel like I've got like the whole Spek solo artist team now working with me at Reservoir, and it's a little bit of a family affair, but I did that for about 10 years in the UK, and then in and around 2005, I got offered a job, my first job in publishing.
Yeah.
That was a difficult decision for me to make. I wasn't really necessarily keen on becoming a business executive. I really thought that I was going to be an artist for my entire life, and I was quite happy with that. But it was an interesting opportunity, and I was always the nerdy guy in the band who was interested in the business side of things. And so I thought, as a personal challenge to myself, I was interested to see if I could be any good at the business side. And so I took the job, and one of the things that happened very quickly was I would do like an hour a week with our head of administration, and then an hour a week with our CFO. And so the CFO would sort of teach me about the inner workings of financial modeling and what they were doing to how they were assessing the value of music catalogs, and how we would then buy them. And then the head of admin would school me on sort of the inner workings of copyright and how copyright was registered, how royalty flow worked around the world, and how that dollar would end up in an artist's account after having gone through the system, which I started to understand in a way that I'd never really fully understood as an artist. I mean, I knew it, but I didn't know it to that level of detail up until that point in my life. And so, it took me about 6 months, to sort of get to the point where I really felt confident, and I would go into meetings. I tell people, it's like when you go into a meeting and they ask you a question and you say to them, "I'll get back to you," you never close the deal that way, But it took me about 6 months to get to the point where any question that would be sort of thrown at me, I had the answer for it, And then that's when I started closing a lot of deals, and started sort of gaining confidence around it. And then once I did, I would turn on the TV, and I would see, Bollywood films on TV on Channel 4 in London, and 40% of those films is music, and I knew just through friends that the composers weren't rich or weren't getting paid off of that. And so I wanted to sort of do a deep dive into why that was the case, and why weren't they getting paid every time the films were being shown on British television. And so I convinced my bosses at the time to let me go to India to sort of explore this. And I went down to India and I met a bunch of the guys who would ultimately become the architects of the music publishing industry in India at the time.
Yeah.
It was really just starting in and around 2005, 2006. And on the way back to London, I connected through the Middle East for the first time. And when I stopped in Dubai, I started asking myself, well, who's doing what those guys are doing in India, like out here, And I started approaching some of the Arab labels and asking them, and it became clear to me very quickly that they didn't really fully understand music publishing rights. There was an inherent attitude generally, that there's no copyright in the Middle East. That's what everybody would tell you, or there was like, oh, this isn't a thing, it's not, I don't know why you're making a big deal about this. Like, nobody cares about that over here,
Yeah.
And then I looked into the copyright laws, and I read that there were copyright laws. Most of those laws were introduced in and around 2002. So the rights were protected, they just weren't being enforced.
True.
There was laws, but there were no speed cameras. And so, so I thought, okay, well, I should move out here and I should set up like the first publisher that's trying to go after these rights for people, and that was my light bulb inspirational moment. And I went back to London. I told everybody I was quitting my job and I was moving to the Middle East, and everybody thought I was crazy, right? Maybe I was a little bit, because I'd never lived in the Middle East at that point. I didn't really have much of a reference point, but I felt sort of inspired by what I saw in India, and I felt inspired by everything that I saw sort of happening in the region at the time. It felt like it was, at that time in 2006, Dubai was just starting to lay out their vision for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
And it seemed super ambitious, and it seemed like a beautiful place to live, and super cosmopolitan, and sort of global in nature, a great crossroads between Europe and Asia and Africa. So I was sold on the sort of concept of it, but I knew that I was up against, strong forces going against me in terms of people never having recognized the value of music copyright. And so there were a lot of people that didn't necessarily want to pay. I set up my first company, and then in 2011, I approached the Abu Dhabi government, which had just launched something called 2454. 2454 is the Abu Dhabi Media Zone Authority, and they had, in effect, a venture capital arm that would invest in businesses that they thought were going to be vital to create the sort of ecosystem that they'd like to develop in the region. And they looked at it as, historically, content in the Arab world, most often the most amount of content was sort of defined by a lot of content coming from Lebanon and Egypt. And in and around 2008, when they launched, Lebanon was going through their own political challenges. Egypt was, going through a revolution. And so there was an opportunity for an Arab country to develop with a politically stable environment, to make it really attractive to bring in the brain drain that was, those people, when they would leave Lebanon or Egypt in the 1970s, you asked a sophisticated advertising executive in Beirut, like, where do you want to move to? And most of them said Paris or London or New York. But by the 2010s, most of them wanted to come to Dubai or Abu Dhabi, and certainly it was the only place that was quite easy for them to come to, And so they figured that if they invest in the environment, the business environment, that they can get a brain drain from all of these neighboring countries and develop an content ecosystem that's focused on Arabic content. At the time, I thought it was interesting, but I now look back at it like they were very smart about that, about sort of having that vision in 2008 and 2009. But we launched PopArabia with them in 2011. And then, very soon we were representing most of the major catalogs. We started with Universal, then got Sony ATV, and then at some point or another, we've represented all of the major music publishers. At present, we represent about 60% of the market between Sony ATV, including the EMI catalog, BMG, Cobalt, and many others. And so we have, really represented big catalogs and then started licensing music primarily in sync. When I got here, people were using music in advertising campaigns, but they weren't actually paying for them. Sometimes they were paying the advertising agency, and the advertising agency was pocketing the money. And the brand thought that the advertising agency had paid the rights holders, but they weren't. And so we ended up becoming a wedge between those conversations and wedging ourselves into it, and then suddenly building business that way. And then in 2015, I got offered the job at Reservoir, and Reservoir at the time were in the US. They had an office in New York, and they had spent the previous 5 or 6 years building up their name as a company that was acquiring music catalogs, but they weren't really known as a company that had a front-facing creative team in the US. And so they wanted to sort of develop a creative strategy, hire people, open up offices, and really sort of pivot into not just acquiring music catalogs, but really having a front-facing A&R strategy. And so I was hired to sort of help, to really lead that initiative. I moved to New York, and for a kid who grew up on hip hop, that was a dream, to sort of move to New York. I had some of my team run PopArabia while I was away, and right away, we started signing and developing stuff, and then hiring people, and over a course of 4.5 years, we went from being the Reservoir 1.0 to what I would say the Reservoir 2.0, which is sort of like really over the past 3 years, we've been regulars on the Billboard market share top 10 in the US. We've had, I think last year we had 19 Grammy nominations. The year before that we had 21. We've signed some of the biggest songwriters in the world. We work with a wide array of some of the biggest hip hop stars, Offset and Takeoff from Migos, Young M.A., Young Thug, Joey Badass, Static Selecta, Just Blaze, J.I.D., and we've had an incredible run, really. So about 2 years ago, I was sort of sitting in my office, still having an incredible time working directly with these artists and songwriters. But, a lot of the mission that I'd sort of, that was the mission when I moved out there, had sort of come to fruition. We had an office in LA. We have, I would say, some of the best creative people in the business based out of LA. We got the same in Nashville. We now have an office in Nashville that we're involved in the country music scene as well as the wider Nashville pop scene. And so, we're firing on all cylinders in that sense, And from my perspective, I was sort of thinking of it as, I'm a Canadian, and in America, the music industry has always revolved around America.
True.
It's part of the reality of the scene, and one could argue that there's a lot of reasons for that. I think actually that it's completely justified, because if you look at the history of music, of recorded music, America has always been the #1 music market in the world since the dawn of recorded music. And that's had a knock-on effect on the way that we perceive pop, how we perceive music, and how we perceive the pinnacle of success to be. It's always like, well, you got to break America. And whether you're from the UK or Canada or wherever you're from, it's like, I want to crack America, right?
Yeah.
And
that's why the Beatles were trying to sing with an American accent, and like at that era, that bands in America were trying to sing in a British accent, which was like really weird.
Right, absolutely, right. And so that's complete. So like I as a Canadian kid, you know, like when we were growing up, you know, every young rap group in Toronto for a period in the 90s sounded like Mobb Deep, right? Or you know what I mean? Like it was a thing, right? Like
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can't help it. The influence is super, you know, sort of powerful, you know. Um, but what I thought was interesting was like in 2010 when Spotify entered the States, right?
Yeah,
It's you know, for the first 3 or 4 years at every music conference, there would be a debate, you know, and the debate was, is music streaming a good thing? You know,
yeah,
because a lot of old school people in the music industry felt like, man, we're losing a $10 CD to make a fraction of a penny every time somebody listens to a stream. And if we lose the physical business entirely, suddenly we're losing this big cash cow, right?
yeah,
And of course, you know, Daniel Ek and the advocates for streaming were absolutely right, that you know the model is completely different. Yeah, you make $10, you know, which is a lot compared to a fraction 0.001 cents every
yeah.
time somebody listens, but you are monetizing every single time you listen to the song, you know, which is a completely different thing. When you buy an album, you buy the album and then you can listen to that album, you know, to death over the course of a year, but the monetization only happened once, you know,
True.
when you bought the album,
Yeah,
right? You know, over here with streaming, you're monetizing every time you actually listen to the song. And so that can add up to a lot more than $10, right? Now, the issue has been that as a music industry, we have really looked at the industry from the perspective of what the industry was, you know, and the industry,
hmm,
you know, the big markets in the music industry have always been the US, the UK, Germany, Japan, France, you know, the European markets and Japan,
yeah,
Australia, you know, the more developed Western markets.
yeah,
And we as an industry really made our money, um, you know, it's like the 80-20 principle, but it's probably even less than 20%, but we were making 80% of our revenue from 20% of the world or less, right? But you know, at some point in and around 2015, 16, those debates stopped happening, right? And people recognized that streaming was actually great. And at some point, the adoption of streaming services hit a tipping point. And suddenly we started really feeling the results of that as a publisher, not just us, but all publishers and all labels for the first time around 2016 or 17, started feeling the impact of streaming like significantly, you know. And
yeah,
so everybody started having really good years, you know,
yeah,
because if you were invested in big catalogs and had large catalogs of music, suddenly you were making way more money than you made ever in the previous 5 years because something had happened with streaming. And
yeah,
the something that happened is really rooted in Spotify's business model, you know, or any streaming services business model, which is generally sort of some quantum of this statement, right? So what they do is they say, we give away our service for free, right, to 100 people.
hmm,
And within 3 months, 41% of them convert into paying subscribers. As long as
yeah,
we can get them to sign up for free, we know within 3 months, 41% of them are going to convert to paying subscribers. That's Spotify's metric the last
yeah,
time
yeah,
I
yeah,
had a conversation with them, right? Every streaming service will have some version, some variation of that metric. It might be 25%, it might be 50%, it might be 40% or 10%. But at some point, it's all based, the entire business is based on that idea that we give it away for free and some conversion within a couple of months happens to paying subscribers, right? And so then if that's your business model, then the business model is premised purely on population size. The business becomes about how can I give my service away for free to as many people as I possibly can, because the more people I give it to as free, the more people convert, and the more people convert, that's more people paying into the pool for music rights. And if you're Spotify and you're competing with Apple and you know, Google, right? Your only product is your music platform,
yeah,
right? And so it became obvious that, you know, for Spotify to win, they have to go into emerging markets. You know, that's the only place that they're going to get the scale to compete. The business model always worked, but it only works with scale, right?
Yeah.
You know, Apple might be able to afford to be able to use music as an add-on because they're selling iPads and iPhones, right? But for Spotify to become a significant business, it has to go out into larger populations. And there's nowhere in the world to go other than Asia and Africa to get that, right?
Yeah.
And South America, you know,
Yeah.
and they were already starting to go into South America and Latin America. So it seemed obvious that Africa and Asia and the Middle East were going to be the battlegrounds.
Yeah.
And so I was sort of theorizing this around 2017, 18, going, man, when these guys enter, then it's going to become an arms race. Excuse the pun, you know, but it's going to be an arms race for streaming, not just for Spotify, but for all of them, because they're all going to want to dominate these big population centers. And, you know, if you looked at the music business in 10 years ago, well, you know, we as a recorded music business didn't really make much out of Egypt or Lebanon because it was like 90% piracy. Same thing with India, same thing with, you know, throughout Africa, really, you know. But you don't need a history of developed art, you know, IP architecture to collect from licenses with Spotify or, you know, wherever they might be. You can do direct licensing. And so suddenly, you know, we're monetizing music in markets where we weren't monetizing music, you know. When I was an artist and we had an album that came out in India, we knew we were never going to make money on that album because we knew the minute it dropped, it was going to be pirated by 90+% of the population. The only thing that we could possibly do to make money in India at that time was go out and play a show. And even then it was so expensive to go out, to fly out to India that it was a wash. You know, it was just something cool to do, but it might have been good for profile, but it wasn't going to be something that made us rich. You know, suddenly, you know, you can get 1 billion streams, you know, in a market with 420 million people, right? And in actual fact, the US is 320 million people. So you can get more streams theoretically in the Middle East than you can in the States, as long as the Middle East has the same amount of time to invest in being able to build their subscriber numbers up. And Spotify and Apple Music and Deezer and all, you know, the streaming services really just entered in and around 2018 and 2019. And so we've got a little over a year's worth of history right now, right? It took them 6 years to sort of reach that tipping point in the States and Europe, right? I estimate that tipping point will probably happen in something closer to 4 years in the Middle East. But when it does happen, when the point at which they've had enough time to build their subscriber numbers in the Middle East will be a bigger market than the United States, you know, from a streaming perspective, right? And the music industry is making 80% of its revenue from streaming these days, right? And so, you know, Goldman Sachs put out a paper on where they see the music industry going. And at the peak of the music industry during the CD revolution, when we were like the biggest we've ever been, was like a $25 billion a year industry, right? And then we went down to like 12 billion when piracy was going on and peer-to-peer and LimeWire. And then since the streaming services have come a couple of years ago, we eclipsed that again and we hit the 25 billion mark again, right? Now I think we're just above that, right? Goldman is now saying that by 2030, the music industry is going to be a $125 billion industry, right? That's like, you know what I mean? That's like like 5-6 times, you know, bigger than it's ever been in the history of music, right? But 68% of that revenue is going to be coming from emerging markets, right? And so it's not going to be because Beyonce is 10 times bigger than she currently is. It's going to be because there are Beyoncés coming out of Palestine and Egypt and China and India and Sri Lanka. And it's going to be, you know, the new fabric of pop music is going to be interwoven with ethnicity, you know, and local language music. And, you know, there's another thing that we've learned from our experiences with streaming services, that what we've learned over the past 5 or 6 years is that when it was a CD business, it was all about, you know, you sign Beyonce and then you get her front racked at a record store, and then whatever's front racked ends up selling the most because that's what hits the most footfall, right? Yeah. When it's a streaming service where you have the world's music at your fingertips and you can listen to anything that you want, and you're not necessarily listening to stuff that is pushed to you. It's a pull business instead of a push business. People tend to listen to whatever's relevant to them culturally, locally. And so in India, they're listening to mostly Indian music. In China, 85% of the streams are coming from 5% of the content, and the 5% is Chinese content, right? So yeah, 95% of the content is international, but that 5% is making up 85% of the streams, right? And so I'd estimate that we're going to see something similar in the Middle East as the data starts to become available, because it's still very young. And then when you combine that reality, that is going to be about local music in each of these markets. So historically, the major labels, they have offices in 40 and 50 offices, but many of the people running those offices were really installed to promote Western content, to get front racked at record stores, right? Yeah. And so the people who have owned a lot of the local content have been mom and pop shops, you know, just people who are musicians like you or me, who are investing in their brother-in-law's band, or, you know, it's locally just developed their own sort of music, small little label. Suddenly, for the first time, these little local mom and pop operations are significantly more important, you know, in the new streaming economy. And suddenly it's about local music, and a lot of the big players who were historically the gatekeepers, who wouldn't have signed a bunch of local music unless it was like super uber pop local music, are not necessarily the gatekeepers anymore, because kids are finding ways to put music on SoundCloud. They're putting stuff direct on YouTube. They're getting 100 million streams for trap artists in Morocco that nobody is messing with, but it's happening, you know? Yeah. And so, you know, what I believe, and that's why when I moved back here, everybody was like, are you crazy? You're leaving New York. You know, I thought you were going to be in New York forever after you left Dubai. And I'm like, you know, I hear you, you know, but the zeitgeist is here, you know. True. The zeitgeist has moved over here. I don't even know if the guys in the States, if many of the guys, I mean, some of the people, you know, at the top certainly understand, but I don't think that the industry at large fully appreciates how the zeitgeist has sort of moved eastward. And I really believe that this is sort of the new battleground for A&R and for investment in new content. And it's too early for me to be able to prove that yet. But I believe in my heart of hearts, otherwise I wouldn't have moved my whole life back to the Middle East, that we're going to see a cultural renaissance of Arabic content, of Indian content, of Asian and African content. And the new face of, you know, when you become an artist and you drop a song and suddenly it gets 2 billion streams in a week, I don't care if you're the president of, you know, a major record company in LA, you're looking to where those streams are coming from. And you're going to be trying to take your American artists and try to get them to collab with those artists, because you want access to that streaming market, you know. Exactly. Wherever you know, it ain't show friends, it's show business, you know. It's just it's just about the money, right? And they're going to be looking at where the streams are coming from, and it's, you know, in 5 years we're going to have a much more mature market. And suddenly, when we're getting billions of streams in Africa and the Middle East and Asia, suddenly that's going to change the face of pop music and how
we even categorize pop music. And I think in the same way that Gangnam Style or Despacito were weird at the time, but have just become a new normal, there will be a new normal of Arabic language music that will travel all around the world, and people might not understand it, but they'll still shake their booty to it. And there'll be something that they think is cool about it, in the same way that we thought about French hip hop a few years ago. Or, you know, I don't understand half of the, or, you know, even with reggae music, Sean Paul, you know, half of those white kids don't understand patois, you know, but they're still singing the choruses, you know. And so in that same sort of way, there's going to be a new fabric of pop that's going to emerge out of the next few years. And I want to be on the forefront of that, you know. And so what I tell people is don't spend all of your time thinking about how do I break America. Forget that. That was yesterday's world, right?
Yeah.
Focus on building your audience out here, right?
Yeah.
Because they are going to come here. You're not going to have to go to them. You know, you're never going to do Drake better than Drake, right? But you can do what you do in a way that he can't do it nearly as authentically, you know? And so if you're an Arab, if you speak Arabic and, you know, you've got a DJ crew with an oud and, you know, you've got your own unique sound, then just think about the best way to amplify that, you know, to make it travel around the world, rather than water it down to try and fit into what's working on American radio or what the American sound is. You know, there's going to be a new sound, you know. And
you just answered my question, is like, which was what should artists do right now to make sure that, you know, they succeed with all the changes that's happening in the Middle East. You've been to PMX, and that's like one of the things that we do is like trying to bring, because we know that eventually we need the authenticity. We know that the artists in Palestine and like in the Middle East are the real thing, and they are the next, as you said, the next Beyonce is like for sure going to be coming from that region. So like that's what we try to always tell our artists too that participate in PMX. You signed one of the artists. Can we talk about like?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely.
so
absolutely.
with PopArabia, you signed one of the artists you saw in PMX. Can you talk about that? How that decision was made? Like, what did you make? Like, what did you consider? What was in your mind when you decided, okay, this is the guy, you know, or the girl?
So we signed Bashar Murad.
Okay. Cool.
It was a weird. I mean, honestly, my honest take on it was, I was introduced to Bashar, and we met before I knew anything about his music or saw him live, but he was playing live later that day, right? And so we actually met and just talked music, just, you know, sort of at that level, you know?
Yeah.
And I thought what he had to say, and I thought who he was super interesting. And I was like, in my head, I was like, I have no idea what this guy's music sounds like, but if it's anywhere as cool as he is, then, you know, this is going to be really interesting, you know?
Yeah.
And then, you know, he came out and did the show, and he came out with his whole, you know, with the veil over his head.
Oh, that was insane.
You know, and that whole thing, and then the chorus hit and the crescendo.
And the visuals,
and he took the thing off. And I was standing next to Martin Goldschmidt at the time, right? And Martin and I sort of looked at each other, and Martin said, if you could have told me that we'd be in Palestine and this is what we'd be seeing, like, I would have never believed it, right? And I was like, I know, like, because look, I'm you know, I'm Muslim by birth, and you know, I think I'm about as educated as anybody could be about the region. But even I grew up in Canada, and I had no concept of what Palestine might do to react to somebody like Bashar on stage. And they loved it. They ate it up, right? And I thought, this guy is going to get killed, honestly, right? But he did it in a very Bashar sort of way, and it was just awesome, right? He's very him. He has a unique voice, and I mean that both literally and metaphorically, you know what I mean? But he's a unique voice in the sort of space where I think it's interesting that there's a Palestinian artist who's talking about the sorts of things that he's talking about, but you know, is sort of not necessarily, not what I thought I'd see when I coming out of the Palestinian music scene. I felt like I liked what I heard, but in my head, I wanted to see more. I wanted to check out more. And so once we were done with the show, he and I just stayed in touch, and he would just sort of send me demos of things that he was working on. And I heard one of the songs that he was working on that I became really interested in. And, you know, my thing was, you know, I feel like the songs are there, but the production, the production sort of, you know, I wanted the production to be worked on more. And my thinking about it was this: I take my cue from my experiences as a hip hop artist in Canada. You know, in the '90s, when I was in Canada, and I would sort of tell people, we would do interviews in Europe and elsewhere, and we tell people like, yeah, you know, we're a rap group from Toronto, like, you'd almost get sort of laughed out of the room. People didn't take that seriously. You know, half of them were like, are there, you know, they would literally say to us, like, you know, are there people of color in Canada, really? You know, because all we know is Celine Dion and Neil Young, right? So is there a street culture in Toronto? You know, little did they know, you know. And so there was this whole aspect of the business that people didn't really take us seriously, right? They didn't think that we were a real thing. Now, I've seen the 20 years that's gone since then, and now we are really, Toronto is the hottest city in the world when it comes to signing, you know, acts in the R&B and hip hop space, right? And because of Drake, because of Belly, because of The Weeknd, because of Jesse Reyes and a lot of these artists, right? And what's changed? What changed was when I was there, you know, I was there when, you know, you know, when your manager was often your brother-in-law, and when there were very few studios there was 2 or 3 studios that everybody went to, when you didn't really have anybody in the scene that had written a global hit. You had people that could mix records, but nobody who had mixed a record that had sort of crossed, you know, off into the US. Yeah. And now when I hang out in, you know, Beirut or Mumbai or Abu Dhabi, it feels like Toronto in the 90s. You've got a bunch of raw talent, but you don't necessarily have all of the ecosystem around the raw talent to help develop it. And so my thinking was, I just spent 5 years working with some of the biggest writers and producers in the world, right? Working with them as their A&R, signing them, you know, having a list of contacts that I can pull on to make interesting things and collaborations happen. And what if we use some of those relationships to bring people together so that I could get a mix that sounded like, you know, it could bang on a radio, but still without diluting the I don't know, you know, the cultural aspect, the authenticity of the music, but just get those drums sounding banging, you know? Yeah. And so like with Bashar, you know, we're prepping our first single, and we've had Marcella Areca mix it. Marcella mixed, she's Danger's mix engineer. Danger's is Timbaland's sort of right-hand guy, so he's worked with, you know, she's mixed Justin Timberlake and Missy Elliott and Jay-Z and Beyonce, and, you know, she's done some incredible records over the years. And she's a fan of Bashar's stuff, you know, and she was like, yo, I'm down to do this. And because of the relationships that we have, we were able to sort of do it where we're not getting outlandish deals coming in from managers who, you know, want some sort of ridiculous price to do it. You know, I've got relationships with people where I can pull those favors and bring people in for something that sort of would work in the context of what we're doing. And so, you know, suddenly we get a Bashar record, but it's uniquely Bashar, but it also could bang in a club, you know, anywhere in the world, you know, and you know, he and I talked a lot about that whole thing. And so the teaming up of getting Bashar to work with some of the other guys that I work with has been sort of the process that we've been using, and I'm really excited about the results. You know, the music is sounding incredible. It's very Bashar, you know, we're not diluting who Bashar is in any way, shape or form, but it's just the sonics of being able to sort of, you know, make it sound like, you know, like a global record, really, you know.
This is really exciting, like seeing a Palestinian artist getting, you know, being open to the world and like getting these opportunities from people like you and companies and other record labels. Let's take 10 minutes for like see if there's any questions before we wrap up. Unless if you
I
want
saw some
to add...
questions over there, and I've been going on and on, so talking too much.
All right, so we have I think we talked about how do you choose your customers? With Bashar?
Oh, how do I?
You can talk about that again.
Never heard of artists as customers, but yeah, okay. I don't know. There's no one thing, you know. It's like it's a mix of different things, you know. I mean, I'm really looking for. It could be like a killer song that just blows me away. It could be sometimes you think the artist is killer, but you don't think the songs are there yet. So then it's about sort of working with them in a development process until to get those to uproot those songs out of them, you know. And so sometimes it's a little bit of help, you know. It's a little bit like, hey, why don't you try working with this person, or have you tried this, you know, or, you know, sort of coming up with creative suggestions of things. You know, you get surprised sometimes. You know, you know somebody has the sort of talent, but it's not quite, you know, a shiny diamond yet, you know. And so then how do you turn it from one thing to the next? So you suggest a couple of collaborations. I'm a big fan of collaborations because I feel like most people do their best work when they work with other people. Yeah, it's usually one of those two things. You know, it's either the song or something about the artist. And in a very rare occasion, somebody comes to you with something completely, you know, perfect. You know, where it's like, you know, and you have to be open enough to be humble enough to sort of be able to know that as well. You know, not everything needs to be changed. Sometimes somebody comes to you with a completely, you know, developed musical project, and then the only place where you can actually add any value is how to market and promote it. You know, because I'm an artist by background, I try to think of everything creatively, and you know, I know that I don't know, you know, every time, you know, so you just go with what your gut tells you is sort of working or not, you know?
Yeah. So like for artists to increase their chances of being like picked up by a label or a publisher, is it just like being out there performing, or just like focus more on streaming? Or
I think, yeah, it's a combination of all things. The third bit that I didn't mention is, I'm talking about mostly about the music. The third is like what you've done in your career, you know. Like, the reality is most labels in 2020, you know, they're not trying to be the train that helps you leave the station. They want you to be the train to leave the station, and they're going to jump on before you get on to the next stop, you know?
yeah.
That's what most labels would prefer, because it means that the hard work of building you up is done by the artists themselves. And you know, the idea of what we were in the 1960s, where you know somebody would get signed, and then somebody would plow money and invest in them, and then on the third album they break. That's just not a reality. It's a myth these days. You know, these days you need to sort of have something going on. You know, and so if you are going to go out there right now, you know, the opportunity is the world is at your fingertips. The challenge is that now, because the world is at your fingertips, people expect you to do something with that, you know, before you come knocking for money, you know, and so, or whatever else that you might become knocking for from a label. So people want to see that you've got followers on social media platforms, or you're getting streams on YouTube, or you've been able to sort of do something for yourself to build enough of a story for yourself. You know, I've signed stuff that's gone, that is like, there's not much going on in that department, but I'm believing in the artist and the music. I signed stuff where, okay, you know, this person has a following, this person has something. Now I can, if I invest a little bit more into this person, I can turn 1 million followers into 2 million followers, you know. And then I signed stuff where it's somewhere in between, you know. Over the course of the next couple of years, I intend to sort of sign something in every space, you know, like some stuff that's super, like, you know, might be getting a lot of press, but doesn't have a lot of streams. Then you sign something that's a superstar act, you know, and maybe you can, you know, so those things are a much more expensive investment, but you also have a potential for a great return, you know. So there's no one thing. I'm looking for a mix. I'd like my, you know, investing in music is the same thing as Wall Street. You know, you want a portfolio of different types of things. And I'd like to be, in an ideal world, invested across different kinds of projects. But ultimately, it's rooted in my belief in the music. You know, if I don't really believe in the music, you know, I'm not going to do it, whether or not it's a big thing or not, you know.
Cool. Do PopArabia accept submissions, or like if someone wants to send music, is like they go to the website, they just submit their music? All right.
Drop me, you know, you can email into us in the website, you know, so you could always drop me a line, you know.
Sure.
It's always helpful. We get people sending us stuff. I mean, typically we don't, I've never signed anything from somebody sending it into the website, but I have, you know, I've been in touch with some people on different types of projects that they're working on. You know, I think ultimately, generally, like most labels and publishers, people want to see that you're doing something, you know. I mean, you and I know each other, you know everybody in Palestine. So, you know, it's not hard to get to me, you know, if somebody really wants to. And, you know, like most of the industry, you know, I take cues from people that I trust, like yourself, or, you know, other mutual musicians that I respect who go, yo, you really should check this person out, you know? So, you know, if you've gotten on the right people's radar, then it might come back to me anyways, you know? And so, you know, the best position you want to be in as an artist is that they come looking for you, not the other way around.
Definitely, yeah. And I think like with everything like is happening now, with the streaming in the Middle East and all that change is happening, it's like artists over there are getting more and more closer to that point where it's easier like for other, like for labels or, you know, international companies to see what's going on and like reach out to them too. Cool. Thank you so much, man. Like, really awesome. It was amazing. We could keep talking for another 3 or 4 hours at least.
All good, all good. Anytime. I'm just going through all these different comments.
Yeah. Well, if you want to.
Yeah, let me just look at here. Yeah, so Stefano asked about statistics. There aren't any statistics on the music industry and the streaming platforms in the Middle East because it's a little bit early. And to my knowledge, I don't know that there's any publicly available information yet. I'd expect that over the course of the next year or two, Spotify or somebody will start to sort of leak out information once they've built a certain level of subscribers. But we're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Copyright IP issues. Yeah, that's a big thing.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the copyright and IP issues, I mean, that's sort of close to my heart, and one of the things that PopArabia is trying to fix, you know. And so despite all of the talk about the A&R scene, at a wider level, we are trying to resolve issues around licensing of music, around licensing of performance rights in the Gulf in particular. You know, but that requires, frankly, a lot of work on a country by country basis, you know, really.
Yeah.
And, you know, you know, when we were there in Palestine for the last PMX, I know there were meetings between the government over there on trying to sort of move something forward locally. You know, it's a process. You know, we're doing the same over here in the Gulf, and I think that you know, we've got our views on how to resolve that in the Gulf, but it's nothing that I can announce here today on this chat. But just keep checking in with us because we're looking to resolve that.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool. Well, for the rest, I think Ahmed Abu Bakr, you can send us the track to PMX, and we'll make sure that we forward that to Spek.
Or even if you go to PopArabia.com, you know, there's a contact section in there. You can drop us a line and take it from there.
Dope. Cool.
Sweet.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you again. And like, it was a pleasure, very informative, and hope we can do that soon.
Anytime. Sweet.
Okay, take care.
Peace.
Bye. So, thank you all. شكرا للجميع اللي كانوا. راح يكون عندنا بفكر الأسبوع الجاي، مش متذكر بس بالضبط مين، بس راح يكون عندنا كمان ويبينار الأسبوع الجاي. عم نشتغل على كمان conversation اللي راح تكون بالوقت القريب مع فنان كتير كبير. راح نخبركم عن الموضوع. تابعونا على الصفحة، ابعتوا لنا ايش بدكم أسئلة، الناس اللي بدكم تحكوا معها، الناس اللي حابين تشوفوها بويبينار أو whatever. ف yeah, keep in touch. وشكرا انكم كنتوا معنا. باي.